Threat actors are actively exploiting a newly identified vulnerability affecting multiple legacy D-Link DSL routers that reached end of life years ago and no longer receive security updates. This video is sponsored by Stonefly. More on that at the end of the video. The flaw is tracked as CVE 2026-0625 and impacts the dnscfg.cgi endpoint used for DNS configuration in affected devices. Due to improper input sanitization in a CGI library, an unauthenticated attacker can inject arbitrary commands into DNS parameters and achieve remote code execution. This means an attacker does not need valid credentials to exploit the vulnerability. Successful exploitation allows arbitrary shell commands to be executed directly on the router, potentially giving full control over the device. The vulnerability came to light after exploitation attempts were observed on a monitored honeypot environment. Following those observations, vulnerability intelligence researchers disclosed the issue to D-Link in mid-December. At the time of discovery, the exploitation technique did not appear to be publicly documented, suggesting early stage or targeted abuse. After validating the issue, D-Link confirmed that several legacy DSL router models are affected, including the DSL 526B, DSL 2640B, DSL 2740R, and DSL 2780B running specific firmware versions. All of these devices have been officially end of life since 2020. Because these models are no longer supported, D-Link has confirmed that no firmware updates or security patches will be released to address CVE 2026-0625. As a result, the vulnerability will remain permanently unpatched on affected devices. D-Link is continuing to analyze additional firmware versions to determine whether other models may also be impacted. However, the company says identifying all affected products is difficult due to variations in firmware implementations and product generations over time. According to D-Link, there is currently no reliable method to detect vulnerable models based solely on device identifiers. Instead, each firmware build must be individually inspected to confirm whether it contains the vulnerable code path. At this stage, it remains unclear who is actively exploiting the vulnerability or what targets are being prioritized. However, researchers note that in most consumer router configurations, administrative CGI endpoints, such as dnscfg.cgi, are typically accessible only from the local network. This means exploitation would likely require one of two conditions. Either the attacker must already have access to the local network, or the router must be configured with remote administration enabled and exposed to the internet. Another possible attack vector is a browser-based attack, where a victim is tricked into visiting a malicious web page while connected to the vulnerable router, allowing command injection requests to be sent from within the trusted network. Regardless of the method, once exploited, the attacker could modify DNS settings, intercept or redirect traffic, deploy malware, or use the compromised router as part of a larger botnet or attack infrastructure. D-Link is strongly urging users to retire and replace all affected end-of-life devices with models that are actively supported and receive regular security updates. The company warns that EOL routers do not receive firmware updates, vulnerability fixes, or any ongoing maintenance, making them increasingly dangerous to operate over time. For users who cannot immediately replace affected devices, security experts recommend isolating them from critical networks, disabling remote administration features, and applying the most restrictive security settings available. And now a word from our sponsor. Get a 56T by fully air-gapped and immutable Veeam backup and disaster recovery appliance, half price. Contact sales at stonefly.com for details. Subscribe for more cybersecurity news. Thank you for watching.